Okay, today we have with us at Craft Cash Summit, Jim Snow. Jim is someone I've known for a while. He is an expert in live shows, finding the right live shows, setting them up. We're going to kind of pick his brain today about some tips and tricks that you guys can use if you're doing outdoor shows. If you're not doing outdoor shows, he's got some great tips and tricks that he'll share with you as well. He does have an Etsy shop, and we're going to talk today about kind of how he integrates the two. So Jim, welcome to Craft Cash Summit.
Hi, thanks.
Cool, cool, good to have you. So just really quickly, I've known you for a while, but the listeners here, this may be the first time they've ever heard about you. So just give us really quickly, 2 or 3 minutes, how you got started doing what you're doing.
Okay, yeah. More than 10 years ago, I was just working a regular day job that I didn't particularly enjoy very much, but it was at UPS. I mean, it was a great job and all, but I was ready to do something else. So I decided I was going to save up some money and go traveling. So I spent a year saving up a bunch of money and then decided to go to Australia and New Zealand. And I was there for a couple of years traveling and working. Along the way, I happened to become an accidental rock hound, and I had a chance to go out and mine some garnets. And after I mined these garnets, I took them to a local jeweler and said, "Hey, can you do something with these?" And they actually cut and faceted the stones, turned them into jewelry. And then after that, I thought, "Oh, well, this is kind of a thing." So I started rock hounding after that, and never really stopped. So um, after my travels, I came back to the U.S. and did a couple of different things, and then I naturally started making jewelry. Because I was rock hounding. And yeah, along the way, I started to sell things at kind of a local farmers market, and I started doing a few kind of small art events and music festivals along the way. During that time, I was actually working a full-time job, which was great and all, but actually the markets and events I started doing were paying enough money to where I was making more money on a Saturday than I was all week. So I came up with another plan too to uh, essentially save as much as I could during my time working full-time job and developing my market business as well. And eventually decided, okay, now's the time to quit. So I did that, and I started doing market vending full-time. Take on doing market vending full-time, and along the way, I also developed a Etsy shop as well. Um,
Okay, perfect. So that I love that story. So tell us a little bit more. I mean, the part that kind of jumped out at me was when you said, "I made more money on a Saturday than I made it all week." What is that? How does that look?
yeah, it looked great actually because I had a full-time job, um, doing more like kind of handyman type work, so real physical, hands-on. And the thing is, um, with doing something like that, it's gratifying and all, but when I would go and do a Saturday event or a weekend long arts market and then come home with more money than I made all week long, um, it was interesting because it's like, why am I working 40 hours a week for somebody else when I know that I could essentially work for myself and make, if more money, if not equal to.
And what were you selling at that? You said what kind of market was it? What kind of outdoor market?
I was doing art shows, I was doing
Okay.
music festivals, and I was doing a farmers market as well.
Okay.
And it was a Saturday farmers market.
And so which one did the best for you back then, and which one's doing the best for you now?
I would say at that time I was doing primarily a farmers market, and that was a regular ongoing kind of recurring event, uh, and that was good and all. But I kind of discovered actually doing like 3 day events, arts market, 3 day kind of art festivals, art fairs, and music festivals tended to make much better money. So I eventually kind of got away from doing uh, just a Saturday market to doing more like 2 and 3 day events.
Hmm.
Um,
I gotcha. Okay, but your booth didn't look anything like this, right? I mean, back then when you first started, you didn't have the tent with the crazy art and all the tables and employees and all that stuff, right?
no, not exactly. Really, from the beginning, when it came to doing music festivals, it's a little bit different than doing an art show.
Okay.
With the music festivals, it was a little bit trickier for me to figure out how to get in to doing that. So I actually partnered with somebody who had more experience doing that. And I found that our products that we sold kind of complemented each other real nicely. So that's why I did that.
So were they selling? So they were already selling something. They already had a relationship with the outdoor event host, and then you just kind of shared a booth or something with them, or how'd that work?
Well, this is a woman who had the experience. So doing a 3 day, 4 day, or 5 day event where you're camping, and traveling to do so was a little bit different than just something that was in my local area. So yeah, it just requires having a lot more sort of hands-on kind of experience. Um, so yeah, I just kind of partnered with somebody who had greater experience than myself, and got started that way. So
Okay, cool. So what did she? Okay, so how many times did you sell locally on like Saturdays and farmers markets before you transitioned over to the 3 day events?
um, I did that for, I would say, it's kind of hard to think back because it's so long ago. I would say 2 years.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah,
So during those 2
years.
years,
I
you're
mean, in the process, I had done festivals and things like that, but I realized that if I just focused on doing longer events, and the money was a little better, and I could put more time and energy into that, and it seemed to pay off better in the long
right.
run.
So so the so going back to the very beginning, because a lot of people who are listening are maybe thinking about just starting outdoor events. Then we have probably another group of listeners who have done outdoor events. They're looking to maximize those events. So let's talk about the first group. The group who's saying, "Hey, I'm making something. Gee, how do I get into some of those outdoor events?" How did you kind of first get out there, and how did you set up, I guess?
Um, you mean in finding the events, or?
Well, yeah, finding like deciding on what event to do,
Mhm.
and then going and signing up for it, paying for it, setting up your booth, that kind of thing. What was you know, walk us through sort of the first iteration of that.
Um, the first iteration is just to kind of find out what shows were happening around me. I found that a, a lot more events, particularly art events, are using a platform like Zapplication. It's kind of online portal for applying for these shows.
Okay.
That seems to be more common, particularly the larger shows.
Okay.
Zap with the Z.
Oh, Z. Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
And it seems like the larger shows tend to use this platform for applying. It's really great because um, you can put your portfolio up on there, and it's really easy to apply, and you can do it in just a few minutes for each show.
Gotcha.
So that seems to be a good one. And then also, as I would do these shows, it's just word of mouth of finding out from other vendors what shows are good and what shows aren't. Generally, if it was a show I hadn't done before, I might apply, and occasionally I'll get a double booth if the show's really good and I want to come back next year. I might get a double booth. But yeah, Zapplication seems to be a portal that works the best. Not all events use these, but some of the more larger and more organized events use Zap.
Okay, so you looked around, you found an event, you set up just like one booth, and what were you were selling just the gems, or were you doing were you putting the were you doing the rings and
Yeah,
like
I
the
was. I
awards?
always. I always began with doing jewelry and gems and minerals.
Okay.
I expanded kind of gems and minerals over time. But yeah, it always kind of started with that.
Okay, so here you've got a table with a bunch of gems that are loose gems, and then like you said earlier in your backstory, um, you went to Australia. You got kind of turned on to gems and looking for gems basically all over the world, and then you started collecting them and then ordering them from different places, and then you set up booths. Kind of like, I mean, is this kind of like what you first started doing, having just boxes out
Um,
here?
yeah, yes and no. I think when I first started, maybe I had a small selection, so I kind of
Okay,
expanded,
right.
and just over time, I kind of figured out, what people like and what seems to sell, um, and so yeah. In the beginning, I probably had just a few different types of minerals and specimens. Yeah, and it just kind of grew over time.
Okay, cool. So what do you think? What do you think was the biggest jump you made from kind of the smaller shows? Uh, making just a few dollars here and there to like making more in a weekend than you could make in a week. Like, what was the shift there? What did you do differently in your shop at the live events to make that shift?
I think it was booking larger events and
Okay.
booking events that were 3 day shows. Doing the farmers market's great. You make sometimes a few $100, which is nice. But if you could make $1,000 a day, then that's much better. So, and you can't really do that. I find that an event that's only for a few hours on a Saturday. I mean, really, you need to book larger events. And I think initially the thing that kind of held me back from doing those events was kind of the uh, cost, because generally speaking, when you do these shows, it costs a lot more. So to spend a few $100s on a booth was something that I could not really quite get my head around at first. But once I started doing it, then I realized, there's a good reason why. So.
So how much are the 3 day events you go to? Like, tell us some of the ones you go to and what they cost.
Well, the general cost of these events is, usually around $300 to $400. They're not usually under three. It's usually $100 to $150 a day seems to become the going rate.
Okay.
When you're doing art events, uh, it's hasn't gone up a whole lot over the years, but yeah, generally around $100 to $150 a day. And the one thing that actually did make the biggest difference when I started doing these shows is always getting a corner booth. And I would say that's definitely something when you do these events, you want to have a corner booth.
Mm-hmm.
For not much more money, you get basically the same frontage you would get if you had a double-sized booth, 10 by 20 booth. And then you get foot traffic too, more foot traffic than you would as well. So, yeah, you just have more frontage, more exposure, and a little bit less cost. Um, and I find that I generally don't want to do an event if I can't get a corner booth.
Oh,
Because,
really? Okay.
yeah, because my profits will uh, be much more so that it's just worth doing it. So.
So how do you, I mean, a lot of people or some people may be intimidated by these 3 day events. If they're like, okay, the money's no problem. I spend $150 a day. I know I can sell 500 or 600 or $700 worth of stuff. That's no problem. Is there a problem actually getting into the shows, or is it pretty easy because they're big enough and they have enough, I guess, need for people to come and sell?
Um, Getting into the shows can be tricky sometimes. There's shows I've applied to for years and still have not gotten in. And I find that a lot of shows have quota, so they have a certain amount of jewelers that might be recurring. They've been doing this for several years, so maybe they don't want to take on any new people who do jewelry, for example.
Okay.
And it's kind of common that they have enough people doing a certain kind of apparel or ceramics or whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of trick to getting to some of these shows that maybe you've tried to get into or know that there's going to be a high quota of jewelers is to offer something really unique. So when you go to apply to the show, apply doing something really unique that somebody else isn't doing, and or that somebody else might not be doing. If it's apparel, maybe you're doing something that's a little bit more original, handmade, and unique. And then once you get into the show, you can just sell whatever you want. I mean, generally speaking, they don't check up on it too much. There's been a few shows that are really specific as to you have to sell exactly what you've applied to sell for, sell. But generally speaking, if there's a show that you're trying to get into that's much harder, just apply with a different product. Not a different product, but something that's more unique.
Gotcha. So these shows, how many of these shows do you typically do a year?
How many do I typically do?
Because you're pretty much full-time live shows, right? I mean, that's pretty much your year.
Yeah, I don't do them all the time. I don't see. There are people who do travel, who do this full time. Like as far as they'll travel cross country, they load up their artwork in a van, and then they just go hit up shows in the spring and in the south, and then in the summer they go back up to the north and do shows. I generally speaking will do art shows in the times of year that are a little bit more relaxed, easy going for me. So that'll be spring and fall. And then in the summer, I'll do music festivals. And then in the winter, I'll do generally a Christmas market. Usually a longer, more ongoing Christmas market. And so I probably do, I would say 6 in the fall and probably 6 in the spring and probably another 6 in the summer. And then a long market for the holidays. So it gives me some downtime. I generally like to have downtime. That way it gives me a chance to create more product. If I need to go to a trade show, it gives me time to go to a trade show. Or just have that general like downtime vacation.
Now, are all 6 of these shows in the fall, spring and summer, are they all 3 days, or some of them like 1 day here, 3 days there?
There might be a few 1 days. There's some that I know that'll be really good. Yeah, I don't always do 6, but I try to have a good solid month of shows booked up. And there might be some that are smaller shows, so there might be a 1 day show. I generally try to avoid those, but sometimes they can be good. And it just kind of fills in space in between. And the one thing I like to do is, because I like to have some downtime, I like to actually group all my shows together. So I'll have a month of doing shows. That also helps kind of hedge against if one show doesn't turn out to be particularly good, maybe because the weather was bad, or it could be maybe I applied to do a show and I didn't understand the demographic was different than what I'm normally used to selling to. And there's other factors too that can kind of determine in the end what'll make a good show, what'll make a bad show. But if I group them all together and I say I have 4 or 5 or 6 shows, in a spring season or summer season all together, and that kind of hedges against if there's some that aren't that profitable.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Kind of spreading your risk around a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I kind of have a general idea. So some of the shows, what is your average that you make per show? Like you're doing 6 shows and you said sometimes you'll make $1,000 in a day, but that's probably not typical.
Yeah.
What would be, I noticed, we'll come back to this in a minute, but I noticed one of your setups is kind of more simple. Like this one here is kind of a simple setup. And this one here is super sophisticated. So I know that you do, some shows that just require like basically you are able to handle everything, and then some shows you've got employees. But generally speaking, what can somebody like you make per day per show? Like what would be a good average to shoot for?
I think the average to shoot for is $1,000. I mean, that's pretty decent. That's kind of hard to do. I would say I'm a little bit more hitting at kind of 700. Seems to be a fairly easy number to hit. I know that some vendors can make a lot more than that, but that seems to be kind of the average. it just there's a lot of factors that play into that too. Like I said, weather
Yeah.
is one thing. And when I say a day, that's kind of like the average. Say I did a weekend and it was a 3-day event, and I came away with $2,500 or $3,000. It's just kind
Gotcha.
of divided. So
Okay.
generally, though, on a Friday, it's generally the Friday of a show is not too busy. Um, you can expect to make your booth feedback. Saturdays are really where it's at, and then Sundays are um, sometimes good as well. But it's
Okay.
usually almost always a Saturday show. So
Okay. Let me just make a note for everybody. So Saturday is really your big day when, you got to have everything ready to rock and roll. Your employees there, everybody knows what they're supposed to do. All right, cool. So let's kind of transition now into sort of the tips and tricks, the nitty gritty. What are you actually doing in the booth, and then to get the sales. How are you getting upsells? And then let's also talk about your Etsy shop and how you're transitioning and how you're kind of like, straddling both of those sales channels.
yeah.